Our story begins 300 years ago when John and Alice England emigrated to America. They were Quakers, and John was a successful man whose business was building ironworks. Sadly, Alice died during her first year in America, and although John came back to Tamworth to visit his family and make his will, he died in America while he was building an ironworks on the Patuxent River. In his will, he left most of his estate to his sons, Alan England Jr. and Joseph. Alan and Joseph had chosen to stay behind when their parents emigrated. The brothers were both Quakers like their parents, and Joseph was one of the proprietors of the Alder Mills, a successful flour mill near Tamworth. Now, the Act of Toleration in 1689 had given Quakers the freedom to build their own places of worship, but meeting houses were few and far between. Quakers in Tamworth met in the Coal Hill Unitarian Chapel in Victoria Road, which was built in 1724, but they usually travelled to the meeting house in Wiggins Hill near Sutton Coldfield for ceremonies and burials. When Joseph was widowed in 1741, his wife Ruth was buried at Wiggins Hill. In 1753, the Tamworth Quakers purchased a small plot of land in Lichfield Street and built a meeting house there. I have a strong feeling that Joseph and Alan played a significant role in its building and financing. The minutes of the meeting house are kept at Birmingham Archives, and these should confirm the names of the members and their roles. So where exactly was the Tamworth Meeting House? Several sources, including the Historic Environment Record, claim that it was built behind 101 Lichfield Street, but the actual site was a little to the west of that. It was set back from the road, with the burial ground behind it, and 98 Lichfield Street was later built in front of it. The meeting house and graveyard no longer exist, but I'll explain how that came about later. I don't believe the Tamworth Meeting House was used for marriages or burials for quite some time. Instead, its members continued to travel to the bigger meeting houses in Wiggins Hill, Baddesley-Ensaw and Harts Hill. Joseph's only daughter, Mary England, married at Wiggins Hill. Her husband, Samuel Freeth, was also a Quaker, the son of her father's friend, Samson Freeth. Mary and Samuel had 3 children, Maria, Charlotte and Samuel Jr. And that was the extent of Joseph's family. His brother Alan and his wife Hannah had a much larger family, 5 sons and 4 daughters, and a host of grandchildren. There's no online record of where exactly the England's extended family lived. Old records only ever give the address Alder Mills. Alan England died in 1776, leaving a substantial estate in Wigginton, Kingsbury and America. He bequeathed it all to his wife for the benefit of their children. The Alder Mills were not mentioned in his will. A 1771 enclosure map labels the parcel of land on which the mills stood as Joseph England's, and it was surrounded by Lord Weymouth's land. I have an inkling that Joseph and his brother's descendants, the Fowlers family, were always leaseholders rather than owners, but further inquiries beyond the scope of this research. Joseph outlived his brother by 6 years. He was recorded as a papermaker when he died in 1782. So the paper mill at the Alder Mills must have been operational by then. Joseph was buried near his wife Ruth at the Quaker Meeting House in Wiggins Hill. He bequeathed his estates in England and Maryland to 2 of his trusted friends, Samson Freeth and Richard Garman, to manage on behalf of his daughter Mary. Alan England's widow, Hannah, the last of their generation, died 2 years later and was buried in Wiggins Hill. There was a big estate to divide between her 4 surviving children. One of these children, Hannah, had married William Fowler in Wiggins Hill, and the young couple had settled at the Alder Mills. William Fowler had probably been managing the paper mill since his father-in-law's death in 1782. William and Hannah had 3 sons, Joseph, William and John, and 3 daughters, Elizabeth, Hannah and Mary. Elizabeth's twin, Anne, had died minutes after she was born. On her mother's death, Hannah Fowler inherited £1,000 on top of the £1,800 she had already received from her father's estate. She was now a very wealthy woman with a substantial fortune. My theory is that Hannah's inheritance allowed the Fowlers to build a new family home, Alders House, on Lichfield Road opposite the mills. This house still stands today, and it's used as a residential care home, Evergreen House. Hannah's fortune may also have funded improvements to Tamworth's Friends Meeting House, or perhaps a complete rebuild. The reason I think this is because the last burial of a Tamworth Quaker in Hartshill took place in 1789, and the first burial in Tamworth, that of Hannah's cousin once removed, Maria Freeth, took place in 1790. But it may be simpler than that. The Fowlers may have decided that their generation could be buried in a different location from the last. When William Fowler died in 1795, his 3 sons took over the Alder Mills. After their mother's death in 1808, things started to go downhill. First of all, the lands in Wigginton were sold. Then in 1814, William Fowler lost his white pointer dog, Perro. I'd like to think that he came home safe and sound, but after being missing for 12 days, it sounds unlikely. In 1818, one of the 3 brothers, Joseph Fowler, died aged 48. His obituary says that he was universally respected and lamented. His widow has lost a most valued and affectionate husband, his numerous children a tender father, and society at large one of its greatest ornaments. It was a bit of a shock when I discovered that only a month after Joseph's death, the other 2 brothers, William and John Fowler, were declared bankrupt. And even more shocking, one of the 2 petitioners was their brother-in-law, Thomas Clark Smart. In the bankruptcy notices, the brothers are described as paper makers, corn millers, dealers, traders and cotton spinners. But they also say now or late of Alder Mills. It sounds as if William and John were already leaving the mills. The brothers may have been overinvested and underprepared for the Industrial Revolution, when increasing numbers of steam-powered mills put many industries powered by water mills out of business. The following month, they were forced to auction off a great deal of their personal property. John Fowler died in 1819 and was buried at the Tamworth Meeting House. Alders Paper Mill survived this crisis and grew to become one of Tamworth's major employers. It didn't close until 1993, after which it was demolished. A new housing estate has been built on the site, bounded by Lichfield Road and Oxbridge Way. So what happened to the Tamworth Meeting House after the Fowlers' annus horribilis? There were only 4 more burials after John Fowler's in 1819. The first of these was his brother's 25-year-old daughter Anne, who died in 1824. And the last was Deborah Shilton, who died in 1827. Support for the Quaker movement in Tamworth was dwindling. Mary Fowler, who still lives at Alders House, submitted a return for the meeting house in 1851. She said that the area of the building was 688 square feet, there was no gallery, it had seating for 130, and it was used exclusively as a place of worship. But on March the 30th, only 2 people had attended the morning service. Its use as a Friends Meeting House ended altogether the following year. Sometime before 1860, Messrs. Cook & Co. built a wholesale clothing factory on the land behind the meeting house. The owner, Thomas Cook, was a wealthy man. In 1867, he took over the tenancy of Tamworth Castle and established his home there. Thomas Cook was baptised a Wesleyan, and he seems to have had no connection with the Quakers. The meeting house was still owned by a charitable trust. Thomas Cook rented the chapel as a store from 1860 and for several decades thereafter. By 1881, he was employing 650 people at Lichfield Street and at his warehouse in Church Street. The present number 98, where Peter Hicks now has his office, was built between 1882 and 1885 in the unused space in front of the meeting house. The house was advertised to let in November 1885, and it seems likely that the lease was taken up by Thomas Cook's son, Alfred Bacon Cook. That same winter, the meeting house was renovated and fitted with seats. It can't have been much of a renovation, as it only took a week. On the 3rd of January 1886, it reopened with great fanfare as a primitive Methodist chapel. Even though their philosophy was evangelistic and nothing like the Quakers, it kept the name Friends Meeting House. It remained a primitive Methodist chapel on and off for 7 years, but eventually the primitive Methodists threw in the towel. By 1891, Alfred Bacon Cook had taken over the management of the clothing factory from his father Thomas. His family were living at number 97, and he also owned number 98. In 1897, the Townsend family decided to sell Tamworth Castle, and Thomas Cook was forced to give up his tenancy. He moved to Leamington Spa, but his son Alfred stayed behind running the family business. That same year, the Meeting House Charitable Trust put the chapel up for sale by way of a 99-year lease to run from Christmas Day. The plot was described as a piece of land containing 365 square yards or thereabouts, situated in Lichfield Street, Tamworth, with a small chapel and vestry now standing thereon. The lease contained a guarantee from the trust to spend at least £300 on the building. The burial ground was not mentioned in the advert. Perhaps that was a marketing decision, or perhaps the charity were thinking of retaining it. The lease was probably taken on by Cook's factory. Alfred's father died in Leamington Spa in 1905. His funeral was held at St Editha's, and he was buried at Wigginton Road Cemetery. Alfred decided to sell Cook's to John Shannon, a well-established clothier in Walsall. I expect they'd been competitors. From at least 1911 to 1921, the manager of Shannon's clothing factory was Albert Stewart, but he lived at Fairview, Wigginton, then Ingleside in Comberford Road, and never on site. Alfred Bacon Cook was living at number 97 throughout this period. Albert James Wood, a tax collector, was living at number 98 in 1911, and Mrs. Dugmore, a widow, was running a sweet shop there in 1921. Alfred Cook died at 97 Lichfield Street in 1925, and just like his father, his funeral was held at St Editha's and he was buried at Wigginton Road. The meeting house continued to be leased by Shannons and was used as a store until 1933, when Albert Edward Coates started renting it from Shannons. Albert was the new factory manager. His father, Edward William Coates, had been a foreman at Shannons, and Albert had started work there as a tailor's presser and worked his way up the ranks. Unlike his predecessor, Albert Stewart, Albert Coates and his wife Edith lived on site at number 98. Now we come back to the graveyard. According to Mabel Hicks, writing in the Tamworth Herald, many old Shannons girls could remember seeing the old gravestones in the burial ground as they went to work. However, in his book Tamworth Tower and Town, the stonemason Henry Mitchell says that by 1936 a portion of the graveyard had been built on, and the few gravestones it had contained had disappeared. 3 years later, with the coming of the Second World War, Shannon's was as busy as ever, contributing to the war effort by making uniforms, and the graveyard was becoming a distant memory. Many years later, Donald Jeffrey Stewart researched the history of the meeting house. Donald was the son of Shannon's manager Albert Stewart. Based on his conversations with Edith Coates, Albert Coates purchased the leasehold of the meeting house in 1957 and paid ground rent to the Society of Friends. Unfortunately, Donald doesn't say how the building was used, if at all. He only records that the meeting house was demolished when certain improvements were made at number 98. This is at odds with the received wisdom that the meeting house was demolished at the same time as Shannon's factory. We can never ask. Albert Coates died in 1964 and Edith in 1978. They were both buried in Wigginton Road Cemetery. The clothing factory became derelict and was demolished in the 1960s, although the brick base of the meeting house was still visible in 1967. Sadly, the only known photo of the vacant area is taken from a partly completed tower block in such a way that we can't make out the burial ground. But reputedly, it was still a lawn at that time. In November 1986, a new retirement and sheltered living complex was opened on the factory site. It was named Shannon's Mill. Earlier in 1986, Jester's Leisure Limited had acquired the freeholds of numbers 98, which was standing empty, and 97A, Lichfield Street. I haven't looked into the earlier history of 97A Lichfield Street, so I can't tell you when it was built, whether it was ever linked to Shannon's, or indeed why it was numbered that way. From 1940 onwards, it was a house, but it was sold in 1968, and the booths from the Fox Inn in Hopworth moved in, named it Alsam House, and painted it orange. They ran it as a guest house until 1978, when it became the Saxon Gateway Hotel. The Wellwells, who owned it, successfully applied for a liquor licence in 1979 and thereafter advertised it as a wine and dine venue. In 1983, there was an application for change of use to licensed premises, and by 1985 the Saxon Gateway had become Kimberley's Wine Bar. When Jesters acquired the premises in 1986, they used number 98 as their head office, and they planned to redevelop 97A into a flagship entertainment venue. The site of the meeting house and its burial ground were included in their purchase and their plans. On the 6th of March 1986, Architects Building Design submitted a planning application on their behalf for an extension to the public house at the rear of number 98. The application number T15264. In November, a letter from the Planning and Technical Officer at Tamworth Borough Council stated that no live music, dancing or live entertainment could take place there. There were many objections from Tamworth Civic Society and others. Needless to say, the residents at Shannon's Mill were horrified. Mabel Hicks cited an indenture in which there was a requirement that the graveyard cross-hatched on the plan should not be built on. But it was no good. Kimberley's closed in February 1987, and by March, Jesters had built a disco on the site of the chapel and the burial ground, leaving just a 3-foot gap to the rear at the boundary with Shannon's Mill. The Punch and Judy opened in May 1987. I believe one of the reasons this went ahead was the recent change in the laws surrounding the use of disused burial grounds. The Disused Burial Grounds Act 1884 prohibited building on burial land other than for specific limited spiritual purposes. But the Amendment Act of 1981 does allow building on burial land, provided that no human remains have been buried there for at least 50 years, or the remains have been appropriately reinterred or cremated. Over 100 years had passed since the last burial, so the Quaker Burial Ground had no such protection. Just in case, I checked Wigginton Road Cemetery records for reinterments, but I couldn't find any indication that the remains were moved there. I suspect they were left in situ. There is one remaining mystery. Why wasn't the decision date on the planning application until the 5th of March 2020, well after the building was complete? I have emailed Tamworth Borough Council Cemeteries Department and the Planning Department on these queries, and I'm waiting for a reply. Since then, the pub and its disco have been converted into residential flats. There is nothing left to show that 22 people were, or still are, buried there. There's so much more research here, but it's time for me to move on. If you want to find out more about the Englands, the Fowlers and the Quakers in and around Tamworth, Birmingham Archives hold the Tamworth meeting minutes, records of the Quakers' charitable trusts and the deeds and plans for the meeting house. Finally, I'd like to thank Tamworth Heritage magazine for the use of the late John Tracy's illustration of number 98 and the meeting house, which he did from memory. And I'd also like to thank Peter Hicks and Lisa for letting me film around number 98 and along its right-of-way along the side of the former disco. See you again soon. Bye.